It's 2019, I've just finished getting through the recently released Iceborne expansion, when suddenly, Capcom decides to drop this on me.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Yeah, needless to say, as a solar hunter at the time, there wasn't a worse feeling than realizing the next big boss fight was going to be a 4-man hunt. For those poor souls amongst you that had to endure beating extreme behemoth of randoms in high rank, my heart goes out.
I can't fucking compete! I just can't fucking compete!
However, as time passed and I actually got to experience Safi'jiiva's fight, mechanics, gear, and lore, I started to fall in love with the Red Dragon, and now he sits amongst one of my favorite monsters in the entire franchise. As a fan of her, and as a fan of big monsters blowing up shit in general, I decided to take it upon myself to figure out just exactly how strong is Safi'jiiva, from both an in-universe perspective and out-of-universe perspective. Something to keep in mind before we jump in though, is that I'll be using my own calculations, and will make sure to link them down in the description below. I know people are fans of country to even universal scaling for Monster Hunter, however I don't think those lines of scaling are ever applied in universe, nor do I think they have very compelling argumentation. That being said, maybe I'll touch upon it in more detail in the future. For now, if you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll make sure to answer them. Secondly, I also have to make clear what sources I'll be using for this video. Frontier's canonicity is questionable at best, and while some monsters may have been ported over to mainline, it's clear the developers are being very cautious with what they allow and don't. It's for that reason I'll be restricting myself to the mainline games and whatever supporting material they may have. With all that out of the way, let's just jump straight into the video. It's easy to forget that when Xeno'jiiva debuted, she was easily considered one of the strongest monsters in the setting. And why wouldn't she? She was massive, easily dwarfing most other monsters and being at the time the second largest capable of flying. She had the collective energy of dozens if not hundreds of dead elder dragons. Her title was literally the Emperor of Elders, and of course there was always, you know, that.
I'm a fire in my laser!
It didn't get any less ridiculous, mind you, when we figured out how this thing works. Quite literally, a parasite that feeds off the energy of dead elders to develop a special organ known as the heat organ. Once it develops this organ enough, the little gal breaks out of her cocoon and begins to seek out new locations to feed off of, with the organ allowing her to convert the ridiculous amounts of bioenergy she stored up into heat. This heat can then be transferred anywhere through her body, empowering the body part it falls on. If it reaches any of her limbs or tail, she can transfer this stored up energy into the ground, resulting in a chain reaction of explosions as the latent bioenergy in the ground erupts. If it reaches her head, well, you know. So, it can't be understated how crazy people's reactions were to figuring out that was just a baby. And so we come to the Red Dragon of the Secluded Valley, and the topic of today's video. So, just how strong is Safi'jiiva? Well, let's answer that from an in-universe perspective first, starting off with the fact that she's clearly an improvement in practically every way to her younger self. This would, as we've made abundantly clear, make her already a top tier in the verse, Very few Elder Dragons have the necessary energy output to keep up with the likes of Xeno'jiiva. This rings especially true considering we've seen what an experienced Xeno can do with her powers in her Arch-Tempered fight. The constant barrage of high energy blasts would quickly overwhelm most other opponents rather easily, and makes her peers with apocalyptic Elder Dragons such as Amatsu Megatsuchi, Shara Ishvalda, Nakarkos, Gogmasiov, Geismagorman, all Mother Narwa. Now we can debate about where Xeno would fall amongst these guys till the heat death of the universe, but my counter to that is in all seriousness though, whether you think she's weaker or stronger than those guys really isn't the point. The point is that any of those guys are going to struggle a lot against Xeno, which immediately makes Safi'jiiva in the running for the title of strongest monster. Or in other words, if you as a baby have most of the top tier sweating, then you know you're doing something special. This direct improvement over her younger self can most easily be seen with the level of mastery Safi'jiiva sports over her abilities, showcasing a level of finesse that allows her to more easily chain attacks, extend the effect/duration of them, and even use them in more sophisticated manners. The culmination of this mastery comes in the form of her Condensed Blue Flames, an attack that combines all the strengths of her previous set of abilities, allowing the Red Dragon to do things it couldn't before, such as transferring heat at a distance, turning any part of her environment into a ticking time bomb, with the resulting explosion potentially dwarfing the ultimate attacks of lesser monsters, or more tactically be used to cause in cave-ins. Needless to say, facing Safi'jiiva is facing an opponent that's had a lifetime to master its set of abilities. However, it's not just a lifetime of experience that allows the Red Dragon to control her abilities so effortlessly, and with such high precision, as Safi'jiiva finally sports a fully developed heat organ. This organ gives Safi'jiiva a limitless supply of energy, meaning she doesn't need to sleep, eat, or even piss for that matter. She can just spam her abilities all day and be assured her body's perfect metabolism produces its own energy. However, if the Red Dragon is facing a particularly challenging opponent her regular physicality can't handle, which mind you isn't very common considering her size, Safi'jiiva can enter into the super critical state, the evolution of her younger self's critical state in which Xeno'jiiva radiates intense heat through her entire body, engulfed in an aura of blue fire, happening when the underdeveloped heat organ reaches its limit of built-up energy, forcing the juvenile into a state where all of its previously mentioned abilities are enhanced, in an effort to release as much energy as possible so that it doesn't die to its own power. Safi's supercritical state is much more stable and grants all the same benefits, such as enhanced physical strength, which can be determined thanks to Xeno'jiiva's interactions with the environment, higher energy output, and faster reflexes. The crazy thing is, many people don't realize that Safi can keep up this form indefinitely, as her endless energy reserves mean she doesn't need to worry about getting tired. Rather, Safi's limiting factor is more so the strain her body suffers thanks to one of her other abilities, which we'll touch upon in a second. However, in moments of desperation, such as when she's close to death, she can seemingly fight through the pain and lock in long enough to keep up her critical state. What, may you ask, is capable of straining the body of such an overpowered Elder Dragon? Well, nothing less than one of the strongest attacks in all of Monster Hunter. The Sapphire of the Emperor, when it debuted, was easily the single most impressive attack in any mainline Monster Hunter game, period. A literal falling star that turns anything in its vicinity into ash. Even the Admiral starts glazing the shit out of this attack, stating,
"I don't think any creature can survive that attack."
That crossover was mean as hell!
Get off that nigga dick, bro. What is you doing?
Keep in mind, at this point the Admiral should be very familiar with powerhouses like Xeno'jiiva and Xeno'jiiva, yet he still feels confident in making such a declarative statement. Considering what this attack does to the lower levels of the secluded valley, I can definitely understand the sentiment. What's even more impressive is that as the Admiral's making such a declarative statement, Safi'jiiva just decides to prove him wrong by literally engulfing itself in it, withstanding the heat and pressure from a blast that can vaporize massive boulders in seconds. She does this through yet another new adaptation her younger self never possessed. An armored hide coated in diamond hard red scales. These prove nigh on impervious to damage from attacks of elite hunters like the Sapphire Star, who had at this point defeated elder dragons such as Xeno'jiiva, Calcs, and Xeno'jiiva. Yet even then, this hunter had to resort to using the clutch claw in order to inflict any meaningful damage, as Safi'jiiva's scale pattern was specifically weak against the hunting tool. A weakness that can't really be exploited by other monsters. Finally, as if all of these top tier abilities weren't enough, the red dragon also sports the ability to absorb bioenergy. Now normally, since it doesn't really require outside sustenance, it mostly utilizes this ability to reshape ecosystems to better suit its needs, such as the Guining Lands, which on its own right is insane because it means Safi'jiiva can reshape any ecosystem to give itself the home field advantage. It also demonstrates a certain level of cognition, with even the Seeker comparing it to how human beings reshape their environment to better suit their needs. Keep in mind this reshaping happens rather quickly, as Safi is able to make changes rapidly enough for the guild to realize it can't possibly be a natural occurrence. However, the most impressive application of this ability is Safi's insane health recovery ability. By absorbing vast amounts of earth-veined energy into its body, Safi'jiiva can accelerate its metabolism to an insane degree, allowing her to heal what would be considered grievous wounds in any other monster in mere seconds. This ability also allows her to quickly rejuvenate her body after she strains it with a sapphire. Something you may not realize, but is true, is that all of the heartbreaks Safi suffers through the multiple siege hunts are canonical, meaning given enough time, Safi can fully regenerate from such extreme physical mutilations. Finally, I'd like to touch upon the fact that Safi is one of the few monsters that demonstrates a heightened level of cognition. For example, Safi's grab is a technique that shows her ability to use her attacks in more unorthodox ways. She also knows to aim where a target is heading and not where they are. Finally, her Emedi mechanic is actually explained to be her recognizing the gravest threat and focusing on it strategically, rather than the more random and inexperienced behavior of her youth. After all of that, it's honestly not hard to see why Safi'jiiva is often believed to be the strongest monster, since her arsenal of abilities could easily overwhelm most elders, with only the black dragons as a matter of contention. She also just so happens to be the only non-black dragon monster ever to be compared to the Forbidden Trio, with multiple statements from the games, lore books, and even the developers themselves confirming as such. Now where exactly she lands in this pecking order is up for debate, but it's clear she's on that level. This is really impressive because the Forbidden Monster classification actually carries some weight, as when it was used, it was meant to designate a monster a rank above an Elder Dragon. And don't take my word for it, the devs confirmed as much as recently as in the Dive to Monster Hunter World Iceborne lore book. So, Safi'jiiva being compared or talked about with the same level of reference as these guys easily makes her top 5 at least in the verse. Editor's note here, in the Welcome to Monster Hunter video that Capcom recently published, there's also this.
Yet there are some monsters so powerful that hunters speak of them with only awe and reverence. Elder dragons. And then there are monsters of legend, ones we may never be able to comprehend, yet we must confront. I speak of the black dragon from the ancient age, Fatalis. And when such a threat emerges, hunters must answer the call, for the sake of our world is at stake.
Between her nigh-on impervious red scales, limitless supply of energy, and ability to heal any wound, it's clear that Safi'jiiva is one of the hardest monsters to put down. Then you add on top of that her ridiculous destructive power, incredible physical strength, high levels of intelligence, and you begin to understand why.
Throughout heaven and earth, I alone am the honored one.
Now that's all well and good, but you can get most of that from just playing the games. What you want to know is how Safi'jiiva fares, say, out of universe. Like, could it compete with other famous fantasy dragons? How hot are its flames? And does the Sapphire of the Emperor truly compare to a nuclear attack? We'll answer those and more, but first let's get a good gauge for Safi'jiiva's physicality. Scaling from real-life reptiles, using the square cube law, tells us that Safi could weigh anywhere in the ballpark of 425,000 kilograms, nearly 500,000 tons of pure muscle and bone. 2 blue whales worth of muscle might explain why Safi can endure what's likely thousands of tons of rock slamming into her. Hell, with that much mass, even her just sprinting generates enough energy to level a small building. Not only that, but need not forget that all of that muscle can be enhanced during her critical state. Needless to say, unless you have the physicality to start throwing around skyscrapers, you're easily going to be squashed by the red monster. However, more impressive than her muscles are Safi's blue flames. The ultimate realization of her ability to manipulate bioenergy, these blue flames are incredibly powerful. In order to figure out how powerful they were, I had to use some pixel scaling and an angle calculator to come up with a few figures for the shape of the blast. However, the trickiest part was determining an analog for bioenergy. In lore, bioenergy is just a mysterious energy source that's found in all monsters, but whose most concentrated deposits exist exclusively in the New World. These deposits come from the decomposed corpses of millions of monsters all dying near one another, with their life force being churned out through the complicated volcanic belt in the New World known as the Everstream. Once found in high enough concentrations, and with the right mix of heat and pressure, these deposits become the massive dragon crystals found all across the confluence of fate. So what material from the real world do we know resembles this type of behavior? I'm going to put my best foot forwards and say that some sort of fossil fuel based analog, most prominently some form of coal, seems likely. I mean, I can't be the only person who sees the obvious resemblance of an energy rich fuel being birthed by the compression of the corpses of millions of dead organisms. And yes, viewer, I am saying the New World is rich in fossil fuels. With our fuel out of the way, I can finally calculate the power of Safi'jiiva's blue flames, which came out to be 25.3 gigawatts of power, or about 6.04 tons of TNT per second. Now that's the energy burn per second. In attacks such as this one, Safi'jiiva can sustain a burn for approximately 3 seconds, or in other words, release 75.9 gigajoules of energy, the equivalent of 18.12 tons of TNT, enough energy to level a city block. Even her more casual flames are enough to level large buildings and easily incinerate hunters into ash. However, on the topic of incineration, how hot are Safi's blue flames anyway? Well, considering the flames are literally just superheated gas, we can infer that their color comes from the radiation they're emitting. Going off their light blue coloration, it's clear Safi's flames are reaching the limit of what the human eye can perceive, easily over 6,500 Kelvin. Using the RGB values of the flames, you can get a total temperature of a staggering 10,700 degrees Kelvin, or the equivalent of almost 10,500 degrees Celsius. This not only shows off how dangerous these blue flames are, easily surpassing the melting point of even tungsten, but also how resistant to heat Safi is. I mean, most other flames produced by monsters are going to feel like a nice warm breeze to the red dragon, as we're past a point where melting metals is a good measure of your flame's potency. Finally, the most impressive of all of Safi'jiiva's abilities is easily the Sapphire of the Emperor. To calculate this one is actually rather easy in comparison, as we're given a good feat to measure it off of. See, in the lower reaches of Safi'jiiva's nest, there's this massive rock formation that encircles the arena. As a showcase of the power of the Sapphire, the developers have Safi'jiiva completely obliterate this formation, revealing the terrifying news that this thing is a mom. This inadvertently makes things very smooth for me, as figuring out how much energy it takes to vaporize rock is rather easy. The shape of the formation is also simple. Just a hollow cylinder that, with just some measurements and using the inverse square law to account for the distance the attack is launched from, can be calculated. We get that the Sapphire of the Emperor launches with a total energy output of nearly 1 megaton of TNT, easily dwarfing the energy output of most atomic bombs and being on the lower end for H-bombs. So yeah, calling this thing a nuke is very apt. It might not have the same range as one, but honestly it doesn't need to. Very few things are surviving that dropping on them. Even out of universe, most non-high fantasy settings like Monster Hunter aren't getting through that. You drop that on King's Landing and there will no longer be a King's Landing to speak of. With her cracked out set of powers and abilities, the red monster is more than capable of holding its own in universe just as much as it is out of universe. No wonder the people of Monster Hunter worshipped it as a god. As the old folks said,
The last dragon climbed far into the sky and became a star of sapphire blue, shining bright